getting ready to Black Church, a book that I wrote that's part of our broader vision at the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Welcomes, welcomes, welcomes. Hold on one second. Hello, everybody there. Good. And then we're also live on Every Black Life Matters on its Facebook page, which we're also sharing it on the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Of course, on Clubhouse, IG Live. Hello, everyone. The first two of this three-part mini series are still there in the room in the 1040 Missions Network house on Clubhouse. It's also on the Facebook pages, Every Black Life Matters, and on Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, as well as EBLM's YouTube page and everything. So we should be all there. And I will.
Welcome, everyone. If you would just share the room, and we're going to go ahead and get started in 1 minute. I just want to ping a few people in the room. So if you'll do that, some of the people that you saw last week, if you'll invite them, we greatly appreciate that. And we're ready to get started. Pastor Dumasani, will you pray for us and for your sin?
Yes, ma'am. Father, I bless your name and I thank you again for your faithfulness and your goodness. This is the day that you have made, and your people can rejoice and be glad in it. Pray that you would bless our time here. Thank you for your grace in this being our third part of this mini series as we discuss Israel, your firstborn, as we discuss Israel, Africa, all of these things pertaining to your word and what's going on in our world even today. Your blessings on Regina and her organizations as well, and all that she's endeavoring. God, we pray that we give you this time and bless your people as we come together in Yeshua's precious name. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we are glad everybody is here. And for those of you who are on Facebook, I apologize. I'm traveling and I'm in a different location, and somehow I just cannot get my camera right because I can't get used to how it looks like I'm continually looking off to the wrong side of the screen. Like, it doesn't even look like I'm looking at you, but I am looking at you. So,
yes, ma'am. You're good.
Go ahead and get started. So, from last week, it was only 2 days ago.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
2 days ago, we were discussing chapter 2 of your book, Pastor, and we were getting into just the different geographies and the groups of Judaism or Jews in different locations. Excuse me, I have to sneeze 1 moment.
Yes, ma'am.
So we were talking about the different locations that they were in. We talked about the Mizrahi, Mizrahi, and then we talked about the progeny of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And we talked about the Ashkenazi a little bit and the different locations that they were in. And so and then we also had a chance to talk about the Lemba and the Igbo Jews.
Yes, ma'am.
And we did a really brief overview of the Black Hebrew Israelites. So if you're not familiar with any of the things that we just discussed, please go ahead and listen to the replay, right? And we'll be able to get those things going. It'll help you fill in the gaps, right? So today we're going to get into chapter 3, but is there anything, Pastor Dumasani, that you wanted to review again from Tuesday that you think will help set the premise?
Only, well, two quick things. Number one, obviously we talked on our first day, we delved into the idea and examples of the Negro spirituals. And it is in chapter 1 that I kind of discuss the Negro spirituals, the history of them, the theology, the teaching, the spirituality in them, all of those things, the hope, and we talked, and you even read some of the examples of different songs, Go Down Moses, and you didn't read this particular one, but did my Lord deliver Daniel? We laid out just lyrics to the songs there. And we talked about the power of them. Obviously, they're the word of God, much of them, and everything, and the stories that are being told. And when you're thinking about the context of these songs, written, created, if you will, by slaves on plantations, singing about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, singing about deliverance, singing about battles and overcoming the hope that was there. We discussed that along with what again I call the flagship, if you will, lift every voice and sing. I know we didn't really unpack it a lot, but we were talking about those things. Well, in chapter 2 that deals with the Jewish diaspora, that the reader understanding the Jewish people, even in a much broader context, particularly after the Roman conquest of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the destruction of the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135 AD. We were saying those things in the context of the Jewish people, and of course, Regina, you had really emphasized, but everything from people of color, what you want to call it, melanated. I love what Lonnie said, the darker paint job. I love the way he says it like that as well. That they're not just a footnote, nor were they built to be slaves. The whole curse of Ham, all that stuff is debunked, right? When you're talking about the descendants of Ham, Shem, and Japhet, we were talking about these tribes of very, very powerful people. And we're talking about all the descendants that came from the sons of Noah, and how there was no race consciousness that we are consumed with on today. There was no dark people are bad, lighter people are good. There was none of that stuff, right? Bad hair, good hair. What there was tribes. What tribe you were from, who you were affiliated with, and of course later on religion, which God you worship, right? Did you serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or did you serve the other gods of the other nations? Those things were the defining factors about who you were. So that as we set up here for now, chapter 3, now we're talking about, in terms of America, the Black struggle for freedom, the historic struggle, and how for freedom, from slavery to freedom, and all of those things. And so I would only say, on all of those things that we were discussing, we were talking about why these things are so relevant to anyone who want to read it. But in the context of Black Americans, in the context of the African diaspora, it's important, I felt, to lay that groundwork before we started talking about things like the civil rights movement and started talking about things like Dr. King and all those things. But we need to have a broader context of Africa and Israel, and then obviously the Black Jewish connection and the Black history, particularly in the United States. So just those things. Oh, last thing, everyone, the Igbo, again, I would encourage you, if you're not already aware, they are an Israelite tribe in West Africa, mostly in Nigeria, the Biafra region. We talked about Remi Alona. Right now, as we speak, I never want to be remiss. We're talking about a people, both the Igbo who identify as Jews in terms of their religion and those who are Christians, are suffering a genocide, one of the greatest ones in the earth today, and it's not being discussed. Thousands, tens of thousands of Nigerian Igbo and Christians, and some Muslims as well, unfortunately, that are not radical but are being destroyed by Boko Haram, Fulani herdsmen. Unfortunately, this is happening every year, tens of thousands every year. So we want to bring awareness to that, the same way we did about the Iranian Jews who are trapped under the Ayatollah's grip and everything. So those of you who pray, whether you're davening in your synagogue or you're praying in your church, be praying for and looking for opportunities to make people aware of those plights and sufferings as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. And one thing else you reminded me that we really emphasized on Monday, is when we read in the Old Testament about the Hebrew children being taken as slaves over to Greece and Rome, we need to understand that at that moment, we are talking about people with very dark skin, melanated people who are being sold as slaves to people of Caucasian, more Caucasian tone. Why am I saying that? Because I want us to understand that even Bible history talks about slavery happening. So the fact that even though, and from that area in North Africa, which is closer to the Middle Eastern part, right, where we know that there were Hebrews, We know that the tribes of Israel lived there. And so it is possible that many of the slaves who were brought over to the United States or Americas that they were at the time, the colonies, and brought over to Jamaica and brought over to Central America, South America, where they were brought and sold as slaves. It's important to understand that there is a very, very good mix of Hebrews people, the tribe, the bloodline of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were there. And so when they're coming over and being shipped out, they are being dispersed. So understand that the history of Hebrews being sold as slaves is from in the Bible up until, our last 2 centuries or so. Right. So it's not new. Like, it didn't just start in the 1800s. That's what I'm trying to say. Right. And that because the Hebrews, the children, disobeyed the commands of Torah, the commands of Elohim, he let them know you were going to be taken into slavery. And so we can see that even before the Second Temple destruction. Is that correct? Because we can see it you can see it in the Old Testament. Even before the Maccabees and stuff, you can see it in the Old Testament. So I want us to understand that Hebrews being sold into slavery from the Northern America and that Northern Africa, up in that part, that they were coming here. And that's kind of what we talked about when we were discussing the Negro spirituals on Sunday's class. Right. Yes. On Sunday, when we were talking about the spirituals that they were singing, Go Down Moses, Roll Jordan Roll, Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho. When you look at the lyrics to those songs of the slaves, you will understand that they knew the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They knew who he was. That's who they worshiped. That was who their savior was. That was who their dependents. That's who they knew. Right. And so that definitely comes from the Hebrew religion, from Torah. Right. And so when Christianity starts to come in the sense of, we're trying to give the Black slaves Christianity, they didn't need that because they knew Torah. They knew the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so we're trying to help you understand that the relationship with the tribe of Israel is not just the, Orthodox Jews that you see in New York City, with the big furry hats and the curly pipe curls that come down and the long beard. There's more to it than that. And then that's how we got into the Black Hebrew Israelites. But go ahead, Pastor.
No, absolutely. So, yes, ma'am. So the multi-ethnic, what we call the multi-ethnic Jewish diaspora, if you will, those the children of Israel scattered from the region of Northeast Africa and Southwest Asia to the world, right? And people would say on a very basic level, well, then why are some Jews lighter, darker? This and that. You're talking about thousands of years now at this point of the Jewish people from this region scattered across. We said the diaspora. The word diaspora comes from the Greek word which means to scatter, right? To disperse. And so you have this is the phenomenon of Jews who are from the region. It's about ancient people of color and woolly hair. And yeah, you had all of that. You had lighter, you had darker. You had we call them the quote unquote melanated, that type of thing. People who would today, and by today's standards, look Black, look mixed, look like they're from some, from whether they're from Sudan, whether they're from Yemen, whether they're from Egypt, different shades, right?
Hold on but 1 second. Pastor Dumasani, yes, Facebook is saying no audio.
They're saying no audio. Are they saying no?
Okay, he's going to check. Maybe it's on his end. Is there anyone listening on Facebook or YouTube? Could you just give us a note if you can hear the audio? And Paula, yes, please check on your end. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Pastor. I just don't want us to go through this whole thing and we have no audio.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They're saying no audio. Okay, if you're on Facebook, and those of you on IG, if you're on Facebook.
Okay, they can hear. Facebook can hear.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Is it
yes.
missing someone else? All right,
All
thank
right.
you, ma'am.
Continue,
So I want to put
sir.
that out
Sorry.
there again, and I won't rehash everything, but we did say on yesterday. Well, someone, why are those things important? Well, they're important in their context, and we actually laid that on yesterday, and I discussed that in the book as well. Why? No, absolutely. When you're talking about spirituality and salvation. Oh, yes, ma'am. Talking about salvation, spirituality, all of those things. Does the color of somebody's skin matter? No, when not when it comes to those quote unquote spiritual things. But if you're talking about knowledge, history, understanding, and especially when you're talking about, unfortunately, in the Western world, and particularly in the United States, where color is such a definition and often such a distortion, yes, then you have to set the record straight. Then you have to say, okay, now wait, hold on a minute. Here is what's true. Let's look at geography. Let's look at anthropology. Let's look at all of those things so that we make sure that we are at least accurate in what we are saying, right? That's part of what we were discussing. But I want to say this last part there too. Those of you who are here, when you're talking about this whole Jewish diaspora thing, if you go to our website, ibsi.org, you click on videos. One of the videos that's up there is called The Jews of India in Israel. And that was an interview that I was able to conduct, hosted by our friends at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. The young man is Elias. I think Elias is his name, but you'll see that on there, the name of that title. You'll see Jews of India and Israel. He shares his story, very, very amazing storyteller, author. He speaks around the country, around the world, especially pre-COVID. He was kind of everywhere. And his books you can't really get. I mean, if you read Hebrew, you can, and he publishes them in the land. So I'm kind of messing with him a little bit. You can get these published in English as well, so other languages, so people can read what he's saying. But there's one quick story, and then I'll give it right back to you, Regina. When he talked about the B'nai Israel, that means B'nai Israel, the children of Israel. This is a specific tribe that was dispersed eventually to India, right? The Jews of India. Not the same as the Jews of India, Burma, who have been making Aliyah, made very famous by Shavei Israel and our friend Rabbi, oh boy, his name is escaping me. I'm so sorry. What's that? Michael Freund, my better half just reminded me. This is a different branch, right? But they're in India, and they traced their roots back to India shortly after the Maccabean period, during the Maccabean period, according to Elias. His ancestors left Judea during the big brouhaha, the controversy post Hanukkah, after the Maccabees, if you know that history, assumed both the leadership in the priesthood and in the kingship, right? So they left, right? They weren't really cool with that. And there's a little quick part of the longer story, just a tiny bit of it. They descended down, left, went down to Egypt, which would happen very often with the Jews. Why? Because it's Africa. They're all the same region, right? And then this particular group got on some ships with the intention of sailing east, where they were going to be living as a group. It was said in their story that they had more than one ship. One of them got a little damaged, broke off, and another one decided, before going to India, there's a group that decided, I may be messing up the story, but you can hear it in the video, to go into the lower parts of going towards sub-Saharan Africa. And as they are there, they actually become melded with the Limba. So then he tells a story that I had never heard before, that these particular Jews from Judea, some of them who branched off and went to India and were there since the 2nd century BC, right? And another group that actually goes through Africa, Zimbabwe, and all that, and actually becomes part of the Limba. Why am I saying that? That is an amazing, crazy story of this one particular group that winds up going to Egypt, southern parts of Africa as well, and into India. This one particular group, that's just one group of what eventually wound up being 7 men and women when they finally get to India. And because the ship did suffer some damage and people had died. As he's telling me the story that was now well over 2,000 years ago, right? I'm going, my goodness, once again, this small group branches off into all these different groups that claim Limba, that claim B'nai Israel, that I'm sure probably claim some other parts of Egypt. When I say claim, I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense. I'm saying this is all the places to where they were scattered, right? So those Jews then would look Indian, They would look Zimbabwean. They would look Egyptian. That's the whole concept that we're talking about now, that they were already, quote unquote, people of color. And then they would have, over a period of time, whether it's marrying others, because sometimes there was intermarriage. Yes, that happened as well. And they got to other places, or just over a period of time, as I discussed in my book. I actually cite from the book Civilization or Barbarism from Chike Diop about how your bodies over a period of time begin to acclimate to the actual environment. So all those things to say, when you talk about the Jewish people, I love to say there is no, quote unquote, looks Jewish, right? They may look like they're from Germany, from Zimbabwe, from Nigeria, from Peru, from Jamaica. That's literally what you're looking at. And in a Western world that's obsessed with race, that blows that collective mind, because you're thinking Jew look like, nope, that doesn't work. That doesn't fit. You can't shoehorn the children of Israel into the Western construct of black, white, and especially of the Western construct of these people are good, these people are bad. It blows all those things away. And people have to realize that as they're coming to this particular topic. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that. I think also what, I know we're skipping ahead in the timeline, but I think it might fit here. What I have come to learn and to appreciate about Israel is that when they find out that your heritage is of the tribe, they don't care where you are. They don't care what your melanation is. They will bring you home. And that is, I don't know of any country. I mean, well, except like Americans want to bring Americans home, right? But what I appreciate about Israel, which I didn't know, is that once they find out that you are truly of the bloodline of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they will bring you home if they can. And so if you could tell us about Operation Solomon and Operation, there was another one. Abraham, was it Abraham or Solomon?
Moses.
There was, huh?
Operation Moses.
Okay. Can you tell
Yes,
us just about Operation Solomon and Operation Moses, just briefly, because I want people to understand that Israel as the nation, every nation has its problems, right? And you can find racist people anywhere. You can find racist people of all different shades, right? All different shades, all different genders, whatever ethnicity. But I want you to hear the story about how Israel fought to bring some of their people home. Can you tell us about that, Pastor?
Yes, ma'am. And as I just do that briefly, I want to reemphasize what Regina just said. Every nation has its problems, whether it's racism, whether it's discrimination, whether it's gender bias, all of those things. That's in any one society, some more than others. When I say that, I'm talking about the extreme place where people are killed for what they look like and who they are, that all that stuff. That's what we're saying, which is nowhere close to a free nation like Israel, for example. Because I can hear the naysayers in my brain. Well, what about this? Like, no, there are difficult stories. I have Igbo friends, both in Nigeria and other parts of the world, who are frustrated with the fact that they are not yet recognized as Israel. Now, I'm not, and it's a long story, right? This is not just a one shot thing. This was also true for the Ethiopian Jews years ago, before that change, and they began to make Aliyah. Now, again, it's an oversimplified part of the story, not because I'm glossing over, just because in the interest of time, right? But we can talk about the B'nai Menashe there in India, near the Burmese area, and all that, how long it took for them. So there's a long story along where that is concerned. So having said those things, yes, Operation Moses was the first official Israeli operation to bring home the Jews of Ethiopia, bring them home, meaning to Israel. And sometimes, what do you mean home? They're in Ethiopia. Well, because their home is Israel, right? They may have been in the region of Kush
And
over some 2,000.
Let me just stop you for one moment. And so
yes, ma'am.
The Jews of Ethiopia,
Yes, ma'am.
Their dark pigmentation?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. For the people who don't know.
Okay, hold on. So the
Yes,
Jews of Ethiopia, dark pigmentation, and the government of who was operating in Israel, what pigmentation were they? Were they lighter?
For those, most of those who Authority, yes, yeah, absolutely. They would be more Ashkenazi, some Sephardi, but lighter skin. Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes,
so the point being here is that as he tells this story, this is a story that although the outside of them were different shades, inside they were bringing home their people. Understand that and appreciate that about Israel. But it took a time for them to recognize. It's not like it just happened. So I digress now. Please go ahead, sir.
That's right. And the Ethiopian Jews were known of for quite a while. If my colleague and one of our IBSI ambassadors, James Walker, was with us, I'd have him give some of that information as well. We've talked about that. But again, all of this will be forthcoming. It's accessible, meaning the longer story of the Jews of Ethiopia, how long they were there, their connection to the broader Jewish world, right? Fun fact that during Nazi Germany, Ethiopian Jews offered succor, offered safety to the Jews of Europe. They actually contacted them and said, here, come here, we'll help hide you, right? So you're talking about now in the 1930s, 1940s, right? This is what their awareness of the broader Jewish community. So I digress a little bit. So 1984 became the culmination of a lot of work of some very, very brave people. I already mentioned before, one of those would be Baruch Tajenya. He is actually an Ethiopian Jew who is part of the pioneers of this. And I told everyone you can look at the book Baruch's Odyssey. Baruch, just like spell like the English spelling of the word blessed for Hebrew, Baruch's Odyssey, that autobiography of his. So the operation that was called Operation Moses was them bringing the children of Israel home. This is what the Israeli government named it. And they had to get them from after they had crossed the Ethiopia-Sudanese border. They crossed over to Sudan, where they could find there was a area in which the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, and the IDF was arranging to get the Ethiopian Jews, secretly sending these Hercules airplanes, is what they're called, taking out all the seats so that you can just get as many people in there like a warehouse, filling it with literally hundreds of Ethiopian Jews per flight, because there's more than one flight. It began to secretly, literally take them, as Exodus says, on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Literally, the same thing happened with the Yemeni Jews, right? Bringing them on eagle's wings, if you will. And they brought them home. And that has been the official, I say official because there were already some Ethiopian Jews in Israel. There were already some Ethiopian Jews who had actually, like Baruch Tajeni, had actually escaped out of Ethiopia because it was in a government that was oppressing them. It was people that were oppressing them. And as Regina was saying, as I made the case before, anybody on the outside would think, oh, you all are Black Ethiopians. What are you fighting about? Nope. They called them Falasha, which meant outsider. You're not from here, right? And they attacked them because they were Israelite. And that was a very, very long story of the persecution of the Jews of Ethiopia, right? So they fled Ethiopia the way other Jews fled other parts of the world because they were Jewish and being attacked because they had been attacked, hurt, and killed because of their Jewish identity. So this then becomes the story of the Jews of Ethiopia coming home to the modern state of Israel, right? This happens in the mid 1980s. I made the story and I told about it in my book. 1984, I just happened to be a senior in high school, and I saw those pictures in the news. I just didn't know what I was looking at, as I said before. And I also told the story, Regina, and the people can listen to it again, I won't rehash it, about the fact that those Ethiopian Jews who came weren't aware of first century Judaism, because many of them had been gone from Israel for so long that they did not even know that the temple had been destroyed. No joke, true story. They get there, and then the Israelis take them to the Western Wall, and the Ethiopian Jews are going, the Western Wall was, they knew what it was. It was a big retaining wall back in the day. They're like, this isn't the temple. Where's the temple? They said, oh no, the temple was destroyed basically 2,000 years ago, and the Ethiopian Jews begin to cry, they begin to wail. The other thing I'll tell real quick is that one of the reasons why the Ethiopian Jews called themselves Beta Israel, which meant House of Israel, many of them began to believe that they were the last Jews on the earth, right? This is how separated they were for a while from the broader Jewish community. So for them, a Jew was a dark-skinned Ethiopian, right? That was the only difference. Talking about a paradigm shift, right? Just like in America, many people think that a Jew is Jerry Seinfeld, period, or a Hasidic Jew, like from Poland, period. That's what the Ethiopian Jews thought about themselves. So that when many of them met Jews who had been dispersed to Europe or who had much lighter skin or looked like they could be German or Poland, they were, as the young folks say, kind of bugging, right? They're like going, wait a minute. They looked at them and said, how are you Jewish? No joke, the exact operation. They were like going, what? Their thing was, how are you Jewish and you're not black? And when they knew that, they said, okay, we are the part of that. And they go, oh, okay. And then there was a celebration. The Ethiopian Jews generally were like going, oh, wow, we have brothers and sisters that are not only been scattered other parts of the world who look very different than us, right? Unfortunately, on the other side of that, that was not always happen, as Regina alluded to, right? That yes, there can be racism and discrimination anywhere. And for some, when they met Black Jews or saw the Ethiopian Jews, there was the criticizing of or the questioning of their Israelite, authenticity, right? This would happen, right? Unfortunately, again, we're people, and sometimes that is what happened for some of the Ethiopian Jews when they came back. They got frustrated. They would even say, I'm tired of telling my story over and over again about why I'm Jewish. Here's our story. And that would actually happen. So that's part of that other side of that story. However, it doesn't change the fact that the Ethiopian Jews began making Aliyah and continue like the Jewish people do when they return to the land in so many different areas. This thing, the Ethiopian judges and attorneys and IDF officers and all the other, you see the Ethiopian Israeli community making as huge a contribution as all the other branches of the Israelite people back in the land. And again, as imperfect as it is no less amazing to see. So yes, that is a broad story about the return. And mind you, it's still happening. My dear friend, Bishop Paul Lanier, he is a pastor of Hope Community Church out in, oh, help me, staff, I'm sorry, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, not too far from where we are, near Charlotte. He he's on the board of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, headed by Yael Eckstein, after her father of blessed memory, Rabbi Eckstein. And one of the many things that this organization does is help the Aliyah of Jews around the world. They help bringing Jews home from Ukraine, from Russia, and as well as Ethiopia. I just got a message from him this morning, and he is on his way to Ethiopia right now to help oversee the Olim, the Ethiopian Aliyah of what they call Olim is sometimes the branch of those that are making Aliyah that are coming home. He's there, and I'm sure I'll be getting some pictures. We posted him on Instagram. You can follow him, Paul Lanier. He just messaged me today saying, hey, I'm on my way out there. Why? Because Israel is still at this moment while we sit here bringing the Jews home from Ethiopia.
That's good. And,
yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't want to. I was going to let you get a word in because the pastor we talked about.
And I want you to slow down because you're getting excited. But I was wondering if I invite you up, Malka, if you would just share what you put in the chat. I think that's important. So I sent you an invite. I don't know if you did. Wonderful. Lonnie, can you mute yourself and Pastor Dumasani because your feedback's coming through.
Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am.
So Malka, thank you for your share in the chat. Can you just share with us what you were texting about?
Yeah, it's so complicated, right? The idea, it would seem to appear on the surface that Jews that lived in Europe were Europeans. And I did this extensive DNA analysis, and so did some friends of mine. One is Black and German, and the other friend is Latina. Her family's from Mexico. And we lined up our DNA, and it broke it down into regions. It was very detailed, right? And I'm not sure the accuracy of that, testing company, but it is a Spanish testing company. And it was just interesting, and I will tell you that I had almost, and, I'm a little bit fairer skinned. You can see the family in my picture is darker, and they're Ashkenazim, but I had far less European, unless you account southern, Italy and southern Spain and such like that, the Mediterranean area is what I call it in Greek. and a more Levantine, much more Middle Eastern, Western Asian, etc., and North African. And they had like 20 to 70% European. And I had like, I don't know, 5%. So they were astonished, and we thought it was rather interesting that we would line people up, you know, and people would assume that I was like more European. So what I'm trying to say is that important blood quantum and DNA to us. But what's interesting is it tells the story of our history. And it does point to the fact that we stayed in the first, what were first called the ghettos. The first ghettos were applied to Jews in the Roman Empire, I believe. And we stayed connected with each other because we had to. And many of us were killed off early on and during the Roman Empire, and there was a bottleneck, and only about 400 of us survived. My family ancestry on my father's side was in Egypt and came to Europe much later, actually, after probably that bottleneck. I'm finding out, which is brand new news to me. So it's just interesting, but the thing is, we always looked for each other, and with the second people that left before the Second Temple, they didn't celebrate Hanukkah. So some of those traditions that were lost, that's how we identify each other. Is what are the rituals you keep? Is the Torah the same, which it almost always is, and the wording and the lettering in every single letter, and then it's the traditions. And if you're not celebrating Hanukkah, you don't know about the Second Temple, that seems rather suspect or strange or different. Does that make sense? So somehow, you know, I'm related to a lot of our team. I'm probably related distantly also to Ethiopian and to Jews all over. It's just that we've been separated for so long. And yeah, it's a fascinating kind of complicated story. So I consider myself ethnically and religiously a Jewish person, and I don't identify with where my family lived. They were never welcomed. They were treated horribly. Two of them were orphans in the early 1900s, and most of my family was living in Israel from as early as 1700s, probably well before that, of course, and especially for the last 120 years. So yeah, that's it. Does that make sense, or do you have any questions?
No, that's good, Melka. I just wanted to bring you up to kind of share your story, because you were talking about it in the chat, and people on Facebook and YouTube can't see it. So I just wanted the contribution so that others would.
I need to make sure so that others would be able to hear and understand that it really is a very complicated issue. Pastor Dumasani, did you want to say anything?
And ultimately, I just want to say one last thing, if you don't mind.
Uh-oh. Sorry. Everyone, if you're on Instagram, you're not hearing right now. That's not you. That's, I guess, my device. So give me one quick second. And I'm still not hearing for some reason. I'm not sure why. Apologies, everyone. There's a little, Malka was talking and doesn't seem to be there now. I'm sorry, me testing. Regina, can you hear me, ma'am? Testing one. All right, it looks like we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty. I'm not sure what it is.
Pastor Dumasani, we don't hear you at all.
Can you hear me? So you're not hearing me?
But Lonnie, you hear me. Major
Regina,
daughter,
I can only hear
if you're
you
in the
now.
audience and you can hear me, can you just please put a thumbs up or something on your... Okay, you guys can hear me. Pastor Dumasani, we don't hear you. And Malka, we don't hear you.
Huh. Okay, so...
You might have to, Pastor Dumasani, leave the room and on Clubhouse and come back in.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Let me try
Clubhouse.
that. All right.
I don't hear anything. Okay, he'll be right back. Malka.
Regina, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Wonderful. But we do not hear Malka.
Yeah, Malka. So I guess what happened, there may have been an interruption on my on my iPad, but that wouldn't have stopped her from coming through on yours. So I'm not sure. Whatever it was simultaneous. So my apologies, everyone. She was in mid-sentence. And if we need to, we can bring her back up if you'd like to, Regina. But yes, ma'am. Sorry about that, everyone. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can barely remember, but yeah, but yes, I know who you're talking about. Mm-hmm. The IDF? You talking about the IDF? Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Yes. Right. Yes. Right. 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 Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely, Lonnie. It's funny. I remember that. Yeah, he's at the museum, and maybe at the Jerusalem Museum, and maybe at the Western Wall too. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, that. Remember that they got the bus, and it was an all-female regiment, and of different, colors. I mean, lighter, darker, and everything like that. But the commander, yes, was she was Ethiopian. I do remember that. I don't remember her name. I even got a couple of pictures with her too, me and a couple of other pastors. But yeah, she was their commander, right? And so when we asked it is okay, we took pictures. They kind of looked at her, and then she kind of said, "Yeah, she was the boss, right? I mean, it was a military, right? I just interviewed Yosef Haddad, who's an Arab Israeli. He's a commander in the IDF. He does a lot of Israel advocacy, and he commanded the Golani Brigade. If you don't think about that, it's one of the toughest groups within the IDF, right? And they have some of the paratroopers wear those red boots and everything. He was an Arab commander in the Israeli army. Some of his soldiers under him were Jewish. Many of them were. Some of them were Arab and everything. But he was the commander. And he said, and again, because it's a pluralistic nation, right? Like any other military, they didn't listen to him. They might get thrown in the jail or whatever. And that never happened, right? They all got along. And one of the things that he said was that his soldiers respected his service even more so. He said there was a respect even more so from the Jewish soldiers for him, because in Israel there's mandatory military service for all Jewish young men and women. Young men have to serve 3 years after high school, and the young young men and the young women for 2 years, right? But that mandatory service does not apply if you're not Jewish. So if you're Arab Christian, Arab Muslim, and there's many different ethnicities that live in Israel, you don't have to serve. So if you do serve and you're not Jewish, you are choosing to serve, to put your life in harm's way, to protect your country, right? And he said there's a great deal of respect he's got from many of the soldiers because they knew that he did not have to be there. Yet he was an amazing soldier and almost died. There's several attacks that he suffered. By the grace of God, he's still with us and doing amazing work. But yes, he put his life in harm's way to protect the nation that he loves and that is his home, and that is the state of Israel.
Great. This is good. Let us slide over now into Western culture, and let's talk about the Black Civil Rights Movement and the support there for Israel. I think that many of us know who Martin Luther King Jr. is, but do many of us really know his pro-Israel stance and that he was vocal about supporting the nation of Israel? So, Pastor Dumasani, I don't know where you want to start on that, but if you'll take it nice and slow and tell us about Martin Luther, tell us or walk us into the civil rights. And I don't know if you want to start with the scripture verses, however you want to start, but kind of walk us into how Black America during the civil rights was very pro-Israel and even before civil rights movement.
Yes, ma'am. So chapters 3 and 4, and the way I tried to do the book is kind of build a case for each thing. Chapter 3 deals with the historic Black struggle for freedom. And then, of course, chapter 4 deals with the pro-Israel legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So because they are different, but they are connected. And this is what I was referring to again about the Negro spirituals, the preaching, teaching that's based both in the word and now is touching on the issues of justice here in contemporary society. In doing that, leading up to this idea, let me say this last thing too, in terms of the Zionism part, once again, this beyond the homeland for the Jewish people also became a rallying cry for many different peoples, including the Black American community, for freedom, for homeland, for liberty. So Dr. King embodies this. It's not unique to him, but what's happening during his time, and again, just in terms, so we understand what that means, if you're tracing his civil rights career, I'm not saying in a facetious way, but just in terms of what we know about him publicly, from the mid 1950s, which was the Montgomery bus boycott, to the late 1960s when he is assassinated, about a less than 15-year period. And again, I remind everyone, when he was assassinated, he was only 39 years old. He didn't even see his 40th birthday, right? So we have his life pretty much in terms of the public sphere as a civil rights leader between his 20s and 30s, right? It is in the late 60s that Israel as a talking point is at a fever pitch. As a matter of fact, much of the anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli, BDS, fill in the blank stuff that we see today on our campuses and media, the propaganda, all of those things, it was germinating particularly in the 60s. What we are dealing with, in other words, ladies and gentlemen, today, the rise of anti-Semitism, even extremist violence, right? The exporting of the killing of people and the suicide bombing and the car rammings and all those types of things that are global. Those things were first perfected against the Israelis. There was no such thing as global terrorism in the 1960s, but there is today. And that's in large part because of Israel's enemies inflicting that type of terrorism on the Israelis. Again, when I say Israelis, not just the Jews, but as I said before, Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, Christians, Muslims. Unfortunately, this would happen. The main target may have been the Jews, but because it's a pluralistic society, you're going to wind up harming other people as well. Yes, ma'am.
Can you say that again? I think that was really important, the part about how terrorism that we know it now in the world did not exist in the 1960s, but you're saying that it was tested and crafted by Israel's enemies and practiced on them first? And
Yes,
then,
ma'am. So in other
can you
words,
explain that?
yes. So as a matter of fact, I'll put that in context. Somebody go, well, that's not true. There's always been violence and hatred and terrorism in that sense. Oh, no, I'm not saying it got invented, everyone. I'm saying that what we understand as global terrorism, right? Terror cells around the world coordinating and attempting to do violence against societies all over the place based on religion and ethnicity. That wasn't a global phenomenon until after it was perfected against the Israelis. And I'll tell you what I mean. So Dr. King, again, let me put this in context and so that I'm not rambling and giving too much, and you can read this in the book as well. Let me say it this way, right? Dr. King, and one of the documents from which we quote in the book is the most, where Dr. King is concerned in chapter 4, is his meeting with the Rabbinical Assembly. March 25th, 1968, right? March 25th, 1968. He's assassinated on April the 4th, 1968, literally 10 days after this meeting, right? So if you go and if you want to know, you verify anything that I'm saying, you can fact check me, go to rabbinicalassembly.org, rabbinicalassembly.org. Click on Dr. King, and you'll see the different transcripts. You'll say an evening with Martin Luther King. This is the transcript from which I'll be quoting just for a second. Dr. King in this meeting, the transcript's about 13 pages long, right? So we have the dialogue. We don't have his whole speech, but what we have is the question and answer period of this thing, right? He's introduced by Rabbi Joshua Heschel, one of his main friends and stalwart allies in the civil rights struggle. As a matter of fact, one of the most iconic pictures is of those men in Selma, Alabama, getting ready to march. And one of the sad things about the movie Selma that came out a few years ago, and I'm not coming against people, I'm just telling you that it seemed as though Joshua Heschel's role was kind of airbrushed out. There was a huge disproportionate Jewish presence in these marches, and unfortunately that sometimes gets kind of pushed to the side. And why is that important? All right, like black folk, any other thing, right? If you're not going to tell my whole story, I'm wondering why, right? If you go tell, oh yeah, and then this happened and the Civil War, but wait, you told that whole story, you didn't tell them about the black regiments that fought in the Civil War. Okay, what's that about, right? If you're going to really tell the story, tell the whole story, right? So if you're going to tell the story about the black civil rights movement and leave out the Jewish part, that's really hard to do, because the Jewish people played a huge role going back to the formation of the NAACP before Dr. King was even born, right? They formed the NAACP with black leaders. So having said that, Dr. King is asked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in that 1968 meeting. And that's not what the meeting about. The Rabbinical Assembly, that convention, was not about Israel-Palestine. That's not what it was about. It was about everything that had to do with what was going on in America and the world. 1968 was an election season. Lyndon Johnson was in office. I think he's going to be running for re-election, if I'm not mistaken. The Vietnam War, right? So you got a lot of stuff to discuss that's world-changing events, as well as a changing civil rights movement. What do we mean by that? The landmark decisions in 64 and 65 had already happened. The March on Washington happened in 63. So now this whole civil rights thing is being redefined in real time. What does it mean for the black community that has achieved these other legal victories? What now remains to be done, both legally, entrepreneurially? What's going on? There's a lot of debate even within the black community. One of those debates was about, for example, school integration versus segregation. These are complex debates, right? Which I can unpack that another time. So they asked Dr. King, please talk to us about black feelings and attitudes towards Israel and the Jewish people. You might say, well, why? Because for the first time in history, you have a significant voice. It's still a minority, but significant voice of young black civil rights leaders who are spouting off very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic propaganda, right? Kill the Jews. I think Kwame Ture said the only good Zionist is a dead Zionist, right? This is formerly Stokely Carmichael. Eldridge Cleaver, the Minister of Information for the Black Panthers, say we stand against the watchdogs of imperialism and we stand with our Palestinian brothers. So you're hearing this type of rhetoric come out of this intersectionality rhetoric coming out of the black community, right? So now the rabbis that are talking to Dr. King, they're not asking him because they're confused about anti-Semitism. Goodness gracious, they are Jewish rabbis. They know what anti-Semitism is. They know what hatred is, but they've never heard it systemically, or not even systemically, really significantly in any way coming out of the Black community. They're hearing Black people say some of the things that some of the white supremacists are saying to them about these Jews and how no good and low down and all these types of things. So they're asking Dr. King, could you please help us with this? In this discussion, and I may have mentioned this in another discussion, Regina, maybe it was another one, Dr. King was giving context. And again, I recommend that you go to rabbinical.assembly.org, and read it for yourself, right? He says to them, because for those rabbis, they are hearing, back to the color thing, Regina, they're hearing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict described in purely color terms. Meaning, they're hearing this propaganda. Israelis are white, Arabs are brown. Therefore, this is colonialism and imperialism. And these white Israelis who are not even real Jews, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this was being said, have come and left Europe, used the pretext of the Holocaust, right? See, some of them even Holocaust deniers, to come and steal land from these Arabs and these Arab Palestinians. Therefore, this is what the Black folks did with in America. So if you know your real history, you know I just butchered all kinds of history, right? I just butchered the whole thing. These are not Israelis who are not real Jews who came and stole land. Once again, you had a practice, or I mean, I'm saying a presence of Jews who remained in the land even after Rome. It changes to Palestine. We already talked a lot about the diaspora, the Jews in India, the Jews in Ethiopia, all of these things. And you're talking about these people returning to the homeland. It's nothing like what's being said, but this racist reinterpretation of the modern state of Israel is being spoon-fed, particularly to the Black community, and especially by people like Yasser Arafat of the Palestine Liberation Organization. This is one of the reasons why our organization exists. We, as a people, Regina, Black Americans meaning, whether we were Christian, Jew, whoever we were, did not choose the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It chose us. We did not choose to weigh in. It pulled us in. Why? Because Israel's enemies started saying, we are the Black people we are the discriminated. This is Jim Crow. And some of our leaders went, hold up, bro, hold up, stop it. Whatever you feel about the conflict, please don't call Zionism racism. Please don't call Israel an apartheid state. You had Black folks who started standing up going, wait a minute. Dr. King was the premier of those people. And what he was doing was explaining to the rabbis first, and I quote, there are some who are color consumed and they see a kind of mystique in being colored, and anything non-colored, meaning white, is condemned. We do not follow that course in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and surely most of the civil rights organizations do not follow that course, full stop. What was he saying? He was saying, Rabbi, unfortunately, some are trying to hijack a civil rights movement to make it about Black versus white. He even said this in 1963 before the march. He said it's not Black versus white. It's justice versus injustice. He says we as Americans of goodwill must come and basically dismantle a Jim Crow situation that is, yes, directed at Black people, but it is marring our entire America. We want to be about what our Constitution says it's supposed to be about. And he says whether you're Black, whether you're white, Latino, whoever you are, let's fight on the side of justice. Dr. King was telling the rabbis that folks are trying to make this about color, which is what they started doing about Israel, Palestine. This is where that first distortion came from, which is why today you have a Zionist is a racist. A Zionist is an imperialist. You hear all that kind of stuff that's been droning on. That's because they've been saying that stuff for the last 50 plus years. And like any good propaganda, you keep saying it over and over again, and then that becomes real, which is why many people to this day think that Israeli Jews are just simply white Europeans walking around in the Middle East stealing stuff from folks of color. They think that because that's what they've been told. That lie started in the 60s, and it was directed right at the Black community. So there would be those young Black civil rights leaders saying those things, then it would give it legitimacy, because if Regina says it and she's ebony, right, then what she says is right because her ebony skin makes it true, right? So let me feed this to Regina as propaganda. They may not listen to me if I'm not Black, but if she says it, then they'll believe her, or at least they'll believe at least long enough for me to get this whole deception thing going. Dr. King was at the epicenter of that fight.
Okay. Let me see if I can summarize what you've been saying. So, one, there has been, you even said that Jews were involved in establishing the NAACP. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. For those of those who need to go check that out, go check that out to find out that Jews were involved in helping to establish the NAACP. Then what we find is that so they had been in the marches. They had been very much a part of fighting for civil rights. Now, then what happened is, as some of us know, if we know any of our Black history, there somewhat seemed to be a rift when the Muslim Brotherhood, when Malcolm X, when Stokely, when they started coming up in their voices, right? They were complaining about King associating too much with white people, right? And not really fighting for the Black community, right? So they are now, and the Black Panthers, you know, they're coming out with their very strong stance of we are pro-Black all the time, always, right? And King is a little suspect to us, right? He has too many white friends. Mm-hmm. So then what we hear happening is that now Palestine is, and I'm going to have you correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor Dumasani, Palestine is really, is that Gaza or is that the West Bank?
At this time, it refers to territories that don't include Gaza. In 1968, for example, Israelis are still in Gaza, and Judea and Samaria just recently have now are under Israeli rule mostly, but you have Arab non-Arab Israelis that are in some of those areas as well. So in other words, you have to go back. The partition that separated in the land a Jewish and an Arab side was largely because of the violence that was being visited on the Jewish people there in the land. And when it was partitioned, there was like these fragments of area that were supposed to be Jewish and the other areas that were Arab. And then that's where the war gets started because the Arab League doesn't want that to happen, right? So not exactly like it is now, but very much you have Arab parts that are under Arab rule or Palestinian rule, and then some Arabs that are under Israeli rule in terms of the Israeli government. 20% of Israel's population is Arab, both Muslim and Christian. So yes, you definitely have separate areas and territories. It just wasn't necessarily Gaza. Gaza was a little bit later on, if you will. But yes, ma'am.
And so what's also true is that we can attribute Arabs to Ishmael.
Yes, the descendants of Ishmael. Generally speaking, they descended from the line with Abraham and Hagar with Ishmael. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
that's not all. I mean, there's Edom and there's Jacob and Esau. I can hear people saying, "Yeah, yes," but when you're talking about it, generally they'll talk about Ishmael being the father of the Arab nations. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when we say Arab Israelites, right, mm-hmm. and non-Arab Jews, the Israelites is because you live in the land, right? That doesn't mean that you're Jewish just because you live in Israel.
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just helping people like kind of delineate what we're talking about here. Okay.
Yes,
so it's kind of like if a Black American goes to live in Africa. Well, you know, your ancestors and things may have been there a long time ago, but you can tell third and fourth generation of Black Americans who grew up, you know, your family always lived in New York or Texas, right? And so now you go over to Africa and you may live there, but you're not African, right? Just because you live in Africa. And so that same idea of making sure you understand that you can have Arabs who are in the IDF. You're like, well, how could that be? It doesn't mean that they're Muslim. We're talking now about their bloodline. Am I still correct? Okay, good.
Yes,
All
ma'am.
right.
Absolutely.
So let's get back now to the civil rights matter.
Yes, ma'am.
So what we're saying here is that we have, Malcolm X and Stokely and the Brotherhood that are coming up saying that Martin Luther King is a little too white, the Black Panthers, it's all about Black power. And so then over in Israel, the Palestinians are going to take our civil rights struggle and say, oh, we are just like that, right? We have these white people, Israelis, who are taking our land. Now, we all know, if you know the Old Testament, that the promise of the land was given to Jacob, through Isaac to Jacob. Well, what Ishmael is saying is that, oh, no. Israel is white, we're Black. That's the real struggle. It's not, they're trying to make it now a color thing. And so they're hearing that over there. So then over here, what we have now is these Black Power, Black Panther talking about the Jews being racist, and that what a comment he said about one of them saying that the only good Zionist is a dead Zionist. That's that same Black power thing that's speaking, because Jews have been very supportive of the civil rights movement. King has aligned himself with that. So if there's going to be a start of division within the civil rights movement, what am I going to do? I'm going to try to pull down all your friends with you, right? Because it would have been a little bit, they could poke a little bit at King, but they couldn't really punch him. You know what I'm saying? But they could punch the Jews. They could punch white people who are structuring around them if they're trying to cause this division, right? Because they want the focus of power. They want the focus of attention to be in a certain way. So what happens now is, in this conversation that's happening globally, is that Palestine is picking up this racist thing, and they're going to say now that the Jews are white and we're brown and they're taking our land. Well, we know that's not the case because we understand the Old Testament. But at that time, the people are just like, oh, yeah. So then we have people over here in America who are having their own struggle with white people, with the Black Panthers, and King and his people are too soft and they're not making enough stand. So somehow, way you're seeing that this pro-Israel, pro-Palestine discussion comes into the civil rights communication, the civil rights discussion. And then pretty soon you are starting to really hear negative, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish talk that is coming. Now, what's important, which we'll talk about later, and Lonnie may be able to speak to it, and I'm hoping that Major Daughter can talk a little bit about South Africa. Flash your mic, Major Daughter, if you're able to talk, or give me a heart or something if you can talk about South Africa, and how Mandela went pro-Palestine. But so I just want to help us understand. So I'm hoping you said yes. Flash your mic if you can talk. If you don't flash it, then I know you can't talk. Okay, she's listening, but she can't talk. Okay. So I just wanted to help us understand just this civil rights discussion, because it can get a little cloudy. And so if anyone has questions, put them in the chat. If you have any questions about how we're showing how the civil rights movement in America began to get infiltrated with this idea of being anti-Semitic voice, which is stuff we're hearing now with BLM and wokeism, right? And their stance of being pro-Palestine. And it's like, well, how did they even get to that? Because I used to wonder that at first. I'm like, how did they what are you talking about? Like Palestine and Israel? What does that have to do with anything? Until I began to really understand where it started from back here with Dr. King. So, Pastor Dumasani, will you continue? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So yes, ma'am. So because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and just for clarification, at that time, where we are now, late 1960s, they didn't call it that. It was the Israeli-Arab conflict, because the word Palestinian in the late 1960s was not used to refer to Arabs. Palestine, again, is a region that was named by the Romans, and it was understood for a very long time that a person who lived in the region, it was never an official state, but the region of Palestine was actually Jewish, even though there were other ethnicities there as well. So they said Arab. Even when you read the transcript, for those who are doubting me, go to rabbinical.assembly.org, read that document. You'll never see the word Palestinian, not once, because they weren't using it in 1968 in that way, right? Dr. King, so when they says Arab, you can, for that purpose, insert Palestinian if you'd like to, but that's what was happening then. So Dr. King is explaining to the rabbis and to the world what is extremely important for us to understand here today, 50 plus years later, that there were those attempting to make the Arab-Israeli conflict one about race or color. This is how it happened, right? So Israel's enemies began to delegitimize the Jewish state as a racist, apartheid, Jim Crow state. And because people in the West, especially in America, and especially Black people, know what those words mean, they can be, I don't want to use the word triggering like a negative way, but those words conjure up images, right? If you say something that, especially if I think you're being honest with me, if you say this is a racist or Jim Crow nation, state, city, and I understand what that is, I am immediately averse to that, right? I'm like, I'm completely not for that, right? Who's really, are you serious? Yeah, see, these people are doing this to these people. Like, oh, okay, well then you just told me these people are good, these people are bad. The problem is that you cannot explain the Arab-Israeli conflict in that way. There are Arabs who are lighter skinned than many Israelis. Arabs who could quote unquote pass for white. You wouldn't know unless they told you, right? And there are Israelis who are as dark skinned as me, right? So that was never the case, right? But it was sold that way, right? And so they tried to sell it, they meaning Israel's enemies, to the older guard. By and large, by the late 1960s, the older guard didn't really fall for it, which is why Dr. King says we don't follow that course, not just in terms of the Arab-Israeli conflict, but about Black good, white bad. This is not about which color your skin. This is about justice. These are principles that we are fighting for, which again, the distortion of that thing here today, all the what gets passed off for fighting for justice as just being anti-white. That's not fighting for justice. You picking out a color of a person and then attacking that person, that's the same thing Jim Crow did, right? You're doing the same thing, right? You attacking injustices, that's one thing. You attacking skin color, that's a different thing. And Dr. King said they rejected that whole, these people are good, these people are bad, we're dealing with justice. Unfortunately, some of the younger lions, if you will, of the civil rights movement didn't see it that way. You are white, bad, period, which is why Dr. King said there are some who are color consumed. They see a mystique in being colored. In other words, Dr. King was as Black, as beautiful as anybody, but Dr. King also knew that just because a person was Black or white or brown didn't make that they were good or evil. That had nothing to do. That's why he said the content of their character, right? Those things get marginalized today in the whole thing of the social justice mindset of rich people are bad, poor people are good, Black people are good, white people are bad. That's just, it's a binary that's not only silly, it's dangerous, because then you start oppressing other people or persecuting or attacking people based on things like immutable characteristics, right? So this is what was shoehorned into the Arab-Israeli conflict. It was obviously misguided, but because of persistence, it has become the rule of the day. There are otherwise very smart people, very intelligent people, very capable people, right? Some Christians, some different faiths or whatever, different walks of life, who when you bring up the subject of Israel, they go bonkers. because of what they've been told. They'll be having an intelligent discussion with you about anything, and you bring up the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel's committing genocide, and Israel's a Nazi. Like, whoa, wait, yeah, that's right. They slaughter Palestinian children, and they're doing like, wait, and they'll because they've read it, they've seen some videos, and all of a sudden, this very rational person that you're talking to, gone, right? This is amazing. It's like what I call the Christian anti-Semites. They love them some Jesus, but when you bring up Jewish people, they got a whole nother song hymnal that they were singing from, right? You're like, oh, wait a minute, what all that? I thought we was fellowshipping and singing and worshiping. And then somebody brought up Israel, and all of a sudden they just face just turned, and those no good Jews. And wait. Not some sort of nuance. Let's discuss this. Just the Jews, right? Just that type of thing. This is why we say the oldest hatred in the world is anti-Semitism. It's anti-Jewish. If you doubt me, look. When you go to the Bible, the word of God says that Pharaoh decided, you know what? There's just too many Hebrews. You know, there's too many of them. We need to start to deal with. Let's start enslaving them. Let's start killing. Like, whoa, how did that start off? There was a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. In other words, not that he knew not. They decided not to remember how the Hebrew Joseph saved all of their behinds. He saved all of them, right? So he decided, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I know these are Joseph's folks, but nah. We're not cool no more. Like, so let's do this. It just boom, like that. And there's now this persecution right into throwing the babies in the Nile. Ladies and gentlemen, the oldest systemic quote unquote racism in the world is that the Pharaoh, king of one of those powerful nations, and now is systematically destroying the Hebrew people. Why? Because they're Hebrews. They hadn't done anything, right? They were Hebrews, and no, that's what we're talking about now. So here, Dr. King is explaining to the world, I know you're seeing this anti-Semitism coming out of our community. He said, I want you to know it's marginal. He said they are not speaking for the vast, he uses the word vast majority of Negroes. He literally says this to them. I can tell you now, that's still true. Yes. Oh, no, there's some in the Black community, anti-Israel, some of them anti-Semites. They got some really nasty stuff to say. They still don't speak for the majority of the community. The sad part is that often those negative voices get the biggest microphones, megaphones, and that often gets passed off as speaking for the Black community. This was the fight, ladies and gentlemen, in the 1960s, right? The difference now is that we've been in it for a minute, and now that type of anti-Semitism is systemic on our college campuses. Kids are going to school being told that Israel's an apartheid state. Their professors are telling them that Israel's committing genocide. Their administrators are telling them that Gaza's an open air prison and the Israelis are doing the same thing that Israel's enemies were saying back in the 60s is now being taught for degrees in colleges and universities throughout this country and throughout the West.
Wow. Okay. If you guys don't have questions, let me make sure I have the hand raising open. So, okay, I have the hand raising open, but you can put your comments in the chat. We're going to get to Mandela in South Africa in just a moment, because I think that is a very key part of the apartheid state, right? Coming from Nelson Mandela, who everyone just worshiped as, you know, and rightfully so. He did a lot of good things for his nation, but that whole Israel is now an apartheid. We're going to talk about that.
Just hold on 1 second. Can you hear me? He never said that. He never called it that. He did ally himself with Yasser Arafat, the Palestinians, because of what he saw as a justice issue. But I just want to make sure everyone knows, even though it's been said, it's a very, very good point that you're making, Regina. He never called it apartheid, right? He criticized Israel for what he saw as the treatment, the mistreatment of the Palestinians. He got frustrated. He did voice his concern. He even said, we know that our freedom is not complete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Yes. But he also said that Israel had the right to defend itself. He couldn't imagine it withdrawing without secure borders. Some of the same things that Dr. King said, which is what frustrates Israel's enemies to this day. They'll say that Nelson Mandela, now Bishop Tutu, yes, he called Israel an apartheid state. Nelson Mandela never did. So again, that's part of the argument and all the stuff that gets said over a long period of time. Yes, ma'am. That's one of those fights that's happened in that space.
Okay, good. Thank you for that correction, because you did tell me that before, because we've had this discussion and you did tell me that before. So we covered that, but I do want to also go back to I never thought about the fact that the first instance of systemic racism we could see with Pharaoh and the Hebrew children, right? The only reason is because they were Hebrews, and he felt threatened by them because there was too many of them, right? And isn't that how things usually start? Someone feels threatened by somebody else, and that person's not even thinking about them, right? And then
Yes, ma'am.
this whole mass murder starts happening, babies thrown in the river, and the oppression starts because they are Hebrew.
Yes,
Now
ma'am.
we know that God prophesied to Abraham that would happen, right? But
Yes, ma'am.
it happened, and we have it
Mhm.
in history. And so
Mhm.
the oppression of God's people is not a new thing. And so where sometimes things get confusing is we have these splinter groups like we talked about on Monday, the Black Hebrew Israelites, who try to then bring in that, oh, Black people are the Jews and the white people are bad, right? That the Black, so they go back to, oh, well, look, we were persecuted. And they still kind of tie that. I think they still kind of tie that to the curse of Canaan, right? That somehow it's like it's crooked thinking, right? But they're taking patchworks of things and sewing it together to create this story
Right.
that the
Right.
Blacks are the Jews that have been enslaved and punished, and it was white people who did this to them, and that's why white people aren't the real Jews and the
Right.
Blacks are the real Jews.
Yes,
They
ma'am.
kind of
Yeah.
do this crooked thinking.
It is. It's a convolution. It's many different things kind of placed together. So, when we talked about it, and those of you you have to listen to the other recording, we kind of did an overview, Black Hebrew Israelite, what that actually meant. There's many different groups. We talked about 3 different groups, like the ones in Dimona, Israel. We talked about Rabbi Capers Fune, who's over the Israelite Board of Rabbis in Chicago, separate from then again, some of this disparate groups who have different types of ideologies and different things. And we focused our attention for that conversation on what I call the negative, what I call the radical. I talk about in my book, the radical Black Hebrew Israelites, the ones that are anti-white, anti-Ashkenazi, anti-Ashkenazi in terms of European Jewish, anti-Israel, all of those things. And I say this, I mentioned in the book, but my observance of the different groups started for me back in the 90s, right? And whenever I say that to people, I'm not saying that because I think I'm so smart and nobody knows one. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I've been observing for a while, even the kind of what you would call an evolution of the groups and the different ones in the country, especially before there was even social media or like, YouTube, that type of thing. And then because people became more and more aware of some of those other groups because of social media, they see them preaching and that type of thing. But to your point, Regina, yeah, it becomes in those more radical thinking groups, there's this whole white people or white Jews are fake Jews. They are Khazars, which are converts to Judaism. This is not me saying this, and this is some of the Black Hebrew Israelite mentality. And they're not. It's so funny. There are white supremacists who say the same things about Jews. They'll tell them that the real Jews aren't. They'll call them not white. I want to wrap your brain around that. Nazis killed Jews because they considered them to be not white, to not be real Europeans, right? To not be of the chosen race. They were actually these other forms of people, right? And other folks who aren't white who hate Jews hate them because they are white. See what I'm saying? So for the Jews, you're white, you're not white, you're whatever I need you to be this devil for me to communicate. No joke. This is what's been going on. Our Jewish brothers and sisters get it, right? This is why when they walk in and they're Jewish and they're dark skin, they know that for those who really hate Jews, they're gonna hate them too. They act like this cool. Quick story, no joke, Regina. About 3 or 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we were at a Israel conference at a church. It was a high level of anti-Semitism. The George Floyd stuff was happening, the COVID stuff was happening, and you got Jews getting beat up in the streets and all the kind. This is happening. Then the 2021, there was this Gaza war, and there's a lot of anti-Semitism, especially in the cities in New York and in LA and the type of thing. And there was an Ethiopian Jewish woman that was there at the conference. I didn't get a chance to speak with her. My wife spoke with her. Maybe they were in the lobby for a moment. And she told my wife, no joke, she said the level of, I'm paraphrasing, The level of Jew hatred is such in this nation now. She said, I no longer tell people I'm an Ethiopian Jew. I'll just say I'm from Ethiopia. I don't mention Jew because I'm getting concerned about what's going to happen to me and my family when they find out I'm Jew. This is a Black Jew saying this is how concerned I am about hatred for Jewish people. So it's not a color thing, right? But for those who want to make it a color thing, they make it a color thing, unfortunately, because of their own brokenness. And unfortunately, for some of the more extreme Black Hebrew, the radical Black Hebrews, yeah. And it becomes a conflation of lots of different things, right? So if I'm the chosen one and I'm Black and he's white, he's a fake Jew, then the oppression that I've suffered is because I'm a Jew, and because he's not, he's oppressing me. But Ham was oppressed and cursed, but that's not me because I'm not a Hamite, I'm an Israelite. Seriously, you have to wrap your brain around who gets oppressed for what reason. No joke, that happens that way. And not to mention the fact that the Black Hebrew Israelites of that ilk also have to explain that the transatlantic slave trade is the quintessential definition of what happened to the Jews. The problem with that definition is that Jews didn't just start getting carted off as slaves in the 1600s. I took you back to the book of Joel during the 6th century BC when God said the areas of Tyre and Sidon took those Hebrews as slaves. Now you're talking about how many, I don't do math well, right? It was about 1,200 years or so before. Now you got to explain to me how Jews were already on slave ships 1,200 years before the transatlantic slave trade. Answer, you don't define it as just Black folks that was on the West Coast. Jews are diaspora people who were enslaved, who were persecuted, who were dispossessed all over the world, in Persia, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe. And for that becomes facts and reality. For those who need to deny that and make Jew whatever I needed to be, not only denying history, you're actually now operating as an enemy of Israel. You might think you're friendly. You're not serving as a friend of Israel by saying that those ones over there they're the fake ones. These are the real ones over here. No one made you Hashem for you to be able to do that. So that's actually what's going on very much in our society right now. And I want to say this real quick. I didn't know I was going to go here, but I'll go here real quick. Regina, you'd asked me about Ipsy being on Clubhouse. I want to make sure this is really clear. We were on Clubhouse when it first, maybe about a year or two after it started. A friend of mine let me know about it. And our Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel would host a weekly room. We did it for a little while, and we'll go back to doing it again. But we began to do some other things, both on social media and some other areas. And so when I would check, what I began to see, I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again in this room here, that as anti-Semitism increased on Clubhouse, it was amazing. So did anti-African sentiment. I've seen this before. People will think these things are unconnected. I've seen it so many times. Some of the same folks open up rooms, houses, to say all kinds of nasty, vile things about Jews were some of the same ones who would open up rooms, say all kinds of nasty things about Africans. It was amazing. And they came commission. They were like correlative somehow. They were like raising. The more African hating stuff I saw, the more Jew hating stuff, the more, and what I started to see, there was less and less of some of those rooms. I would go in and follow some of those houses of some of these young Black African entrepreneurs just to see what was popping, what was going on and everything. And they Africa Day and those types of things. They were discussing all these kinds of different things. And I would just go in and just listen and just check it out. I remember a couple of times, some from Ghana, some Nigeria. Oftentimes it was kind of Pan-African, different ones would be in there. I remember one time I was in there, they were planning a big celebration for Africa Day, right? And I didn't know anybody personally in the room. Every once in a while I would, but I didn't know a lot of these young people, right? And they're from the diaspora. They're, like I said, they're on the continent. They're in the UK. And one of them, they would pause, is that we see Brother Dumisani is with us. Would you like to say something? They didn't even know me, right? But they saw that because I got all this white beard on my face, right? So they figured some old dude, right, is on the thing checking out. So he's asked me as an elder, basically, would you like to say something? And I remember I was like, no, hey, I'm just listening to you all. So proud of what you're doing. Just here, just lending my support. And I saw those rooms start to disappear. And it wasn't lost on me that those rooms, not that there's not still there, they are, but it wasn't lost on me. This was unscientific observation. I'm just watching that the more African hating rooms I saw, the less African rooms I saw. But I saw the same thing, the more anti-Semitic rooms. Let me come together, talk about this, blah, 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 the Jewish people. I would see less of some of the other Jewish rooms as well for a little while. So I just wanted to say that we observed that thing happening from its own perspective, right? That was just amazing to me. And to this day, I found that a lot of folks who hate Jews, oftentimes they hate Africans too. It's an amazing phenomenon.
Wow. it is kind of a lot to swallow, right? When we begin even thinking about the fact that it almost seems unreal sometimes that there is anti-Semitism, right? Because I'm like, what? How could you hate someone so distinctly because they believe this? But yet, for example, so let's think about Paul persecuting the early church, right? Mm-hmm. So when Paul is persecuting the early church, they have not yet taken on this Christianity as we know it right now. You could you could almost say that you had Jews hating other Jews, right? Because Paul was very very, I don't want to say orthodox, that's not the right word, but he was very pharisaical, right? Very Pharisee in his upbringing, Apostle Paul, when he was going out, when they were sending him out to persecute. Now we use the word Christians, right? But we got to understand that the Christian that they were is not the same Christian that we are now, right? They were a lot closer to the Jews by keeping Torah, keeping the Sabbath, keeping the feasts, right? Christians today, we don't keep the feasts and all of those things. Some do, but in general. So you had a sect of Judaism persecuting another sect of Judaism, right? So so this idea that we can see this in the Bible of Paul, of the Pharisees, right? And then later on, we see the Catholic Church come in, and we see other kinds of persecution that are happening now to this term that's being called Christian. But back then, they were probably a lot more Jewish than they were Christian, because they were keeping the feasts and they keeping Torah. That's why I say that, right? So they were a lot more Jewish than they were Christian per se, as far as the Catholic construct, right? Because after the Catholics kind of really destroyed and separated them, then they kind of took it over, right? And brought Mary and Jesus and all these things in together and draped their kind of Christianity over Yeshua, right? And so you have this now, what we have, Christian construct, which we understand was started with Catholicism in some ways. So, but what I'm saying to you, and I want us to think about, and it's just a lot to think about. That this is probably one of our heavier conversations that we've had of the 3 conversations that we've had. This one is very intellectual, I think. And I've noticed that our room has dropped, right? Because we are now like really talking about civil rights. We're talking about apartheid. We're like, you really, if you're hanging out in this room with us, you are hanging in because mentally you enjoy the calisthenics that we are working you out with, right? You are getting a workout of your brain today in our conversations about Zionism and about anti-Semitism. And so what's interesting, and the reason why I brought up Paul kind of like a sect of Judaism persecuting another sect of Judaism is because something that Pastor Dumasani said to me, and he actually warned me about, in our conversations, that you can be, as he said, having conversation with Christians. Oh, we love Jesus. Oh, Jesus is this, is everything. And then as soon as you bring up the Jews, they like go Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Like they just lose their mind. And I was saying to him at first, I was like, oh, maybe because they feel threatened, because this idea that we have of Christians now, this replacement theology. Some of us have been taught about replacement theology, the idea that the New Testament believer now replaces the Jews. Like Israel is not important. It's the New Testament now. Because Jesus came, everything else is gone, and now it's us. And so now Jews need to get saved. All right. That's what we're saying. Like Jews need to give up the Torah and everything, and they need to get saved. And so it's this idea that that somehow within Christianity that there's certain of them that think that they are better, that they are best, that the idea that God had chosen people, they don't understand that. And chosen is a word to be used, but not really. It talks about being a representative, because it was always about, they were supposed to be blessed so that they could bless all the nations of the earth, right? Through them, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Now, they made some mistakes in and of themselves as well, in the idea that they kept it to themselves, right? And they were supposed to be a light. They were supposed to be teaching. And the persecution that happened, I understand that, right? And we don't know what we would have done had we been in their place, right? Because we weren't there being persecuted, right? We weren't there. Like, we're saying, oh, when I've had discussions with Christians who are like, I can't believe they just got out of Egypt and they accepted Torah and then they're worshiping a golden calf, right? I never would have done that. Like, oh, really? Do you really know what you would have done if Moses had been gone for 40 days? You guys just came out of Egypt. You feel like you have no leader. And so now you just did Torah. You saw what God did for you with all the 10 plagues. And then you go worship some golden cow. I never would have done that. How could they? I've been in conversations on our Sabbath studies, with some people, and they just start beating up the Jews, right? The Hebrew, like, how could they do that? How God told them that if they did this, this was going to happen to them. And how, I would have done that. And they're like, thank God for Jesus. Now I have Jesus. Everything is okay. And it's like, oh, like, no. You've been taught wrong. You misunderstood. And some of you who are listening to me now, you understand what I'm getting. And others of you you're going to have to think about it for a minute, right? But this idea that people are persecuted, that the Jews have been persecuted and are still being persecuted is very real. And are Christians being persecuted? Yes, they are. I'm not trying to say that Christians are not being persecuted as well. But I feel that is only because we still desire to represent the same creator, right? And evil is always going to do that, right? Any way that evil can separate humanity from their creator, evil will do that. So I feel for any person who is trying to have a relationship with their creator and their honest understanding of it, evil is always going to come in. So persecution and anti-Semitism, though, is very real, because the Father said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And so those who are cursed because they're cursing the other people, and then they're blaming the other people for why they live a cursed life, do not realize that it's not the people who cursed you, it's God, right? And so you can't look at a group of people and curse them. And then when curses come back on you, like, oh, it's your fault. It's like, no, there's a rule and a law that has been set up in the earth that is now operating and working like gravity. If you jump off the top of a building, you're going to fall down and hurt yourself and you may die. Right. But you don't want to blame gravity. You want to say it's somebody else's fault why the gravity hurt you. And that's what's happening with the way that people are cursing those that God has blessed. And we have to be careful about, and I know Pastor Dumasami and I may differ on some things because we've talked about this and we're able to have a discussion without, going at each other's throats. But we do differ on some of the things that I'm saying right now. And it's fine for him when I'm done for him to come back and state, where he differs. Because I think it's good for us to know that we can have different opinions, but our hearts are still for God's people, right? And for whatever it is that God has put down. But, when God said that I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, that included Ishmael and his people, because Ishmael was circumcised. When Jehovah came down and changed Abram's name to Abraham and changed Sarah's name to Sarai, and he said, this is it, and everybody in your household needs to be circumcised, right? This is how you come into the promise. Ishmael was circumcised, people.
Mm-hmm.
He became part of that. Now, can you step out of that and do all sorts of crazy things? Sure, you can. Because look at the story with Dinah's brothers when, all those boys had that whole city of men get circumcised, and then they went out there and killed them all. That's our first evidence of gang violence. That's what I say, right? There's gang violence in real life, right? You're not with us. You hurt our people, so we're going to come and kill you. And you tricked them, and they went out and they killed them. And what's terrible is they actually use circumcision, a sign of covenant, to trip them up, right? Talk about being dirty. I mean, talk about using God's promise of covenant as a way to weaken a people so that you could slaughter them. That's dirty. That's downright dirty, playing gang violence. And so understand that Ishmael is still part of the blessing, because now he may not have been the promise and but he still was part of his seed. And so therefore he's blessed. That's what the thing said. He's part of the seed. He was blessed. He was circumcised. He was brought into the covenant. And then even after he had Isaac with Keturah, he went and had more sons. So all of them are of the seed of Abraham. Now there's a promise for the line of Yeshua to come through, the king of David to be on the throne, but all of them are still his seed. So all of them are blessed. And as we're talking about the diaspora and how it's been spread out, and whoever, you don't know who you're talking to, right? So let's not curse anybody. How about we do that? If you want to cover your bases. So I want us to begin to think about what we do, not only within Christianity, but how that even those Jews who may curse other Jews, you're subject to that curse as well, right? Don't think that because you're a Jew that you don't get cursed. Well, if you're cursing other seed, you're going to be liable to the punishment of cursing other seed. So there's a whole bunch of liability going on for how we speak about against the promise that God has said, in blessing, I will bless you, and cursing, I will curse you. And so we can see a lot of that spread out, all over. So some things I want you to think about. And so I'm going to let Pastor Dumasani come in and disagree with me, because that's good. I'm okay with that.
No, and Regina, no, it's good that we would see some things differently about others. We talked about some in the past and everything, and this is what's so important, especially in this day and age, that people talk and touch and agree, and some things they disagree on, and then that doesn't change anything in terms of both, but whether what they're working on together, all those types of things. So in terms of the Ishmael part, that I understand your point. I probably would disagree a little bit, but to me that's not important, and not in terms of him being blessed, the Abrahamic, and you even made that distinction about the promise being Isaac and that type of thing. I guess that the only thing that I would say to just accompany what you were saying is that whether it's the cursing or the division and that type of thing. I had I've said this before. One of the things I think somebody asked me when we were talking about, for example, the radical version of the Black Hebrew Israelites, and they were asking me, do you have relationships or connection with those people? I guess they were talking about the different communities I was naming. I said, yes. I mean, I know people in Dimona. I know and work with people from the Israelite Board of Rabbis. One of them is actually part of the IPSI ambassadors, right? But I've known others, and I've worked with them. And then, yes, I've engaged with the young brothers who are part of the radical one, right? I've talked with them. We've had conversations. And again, for a long period of time, right? So I've had a couple of decades, almost 3 decades of watching this since the 90s till now. And one of the things we talked about, Regina, that you talked about the cursing and the whole, whether it's, cursing someone else, hating someone else, the type of thing. I've shared with some of them in the past. Now I'm talking about the whole anti-Jewish, anti-Black, or anti-white, with that part of it, right? It's not the only, but I'm talking about what I've dealt with personally and discussing. And Torah says that the ultimate punishment for the Israelites who did not keep Torah was expulsion from the land, right? That was the ultimate punishment, right? He says this in different parts of the Torah itself, but in Deuteronomy 28, most famously, right, that I'm going to send you as slaves and you're going to, from nations that language you don't know. It talks about subjugation being a part of the actual punishment for violating Torah, right? And I'm making a point here. So for those of the more radical ilk, or that, those white people, and they stole this and they stole that, we would use them. And what I would say to them is that if you truly believe that you are Israelite, if you truly believe you are Hebrew, not even set aside that whole the real ones, right? But if you truly believe, right, then you understand that you are only in the diaspora because your people sinned, right? So you might want to just pump the brakes a minute, right? Because if you're saying that to me in Atlanta, in San Francisco, whatever like that, you are not in the land. According to you, you were expelled from the land because of violating Torah. So for then you to go from I'm the real one, they're the fake ones, to they stole my heritage, I'm like going, okay, wait a minute. But Torah says, not somebody stealing your heritage, saying that I'm going to give your land over. In other words, your first response should probably be teshuva, which is the word for repentance, not let me hate on X, Y, and Z. Because if you were in the land and no longer in the land and feel someone has stolen your birthright, that would be because your people abdicated your birthright, right? This is the whole point, right? And the reason I'm saying it that way is because one of the things that love of God, love of his scriptures, and what it should be doing in my heart and mind, first and foremost, is transforming me, right? Let's go back to the Brit Hadashah, to the New Testament, you talking about Paul, and be ye not conformed to this broken, messed up world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So if the renewing of your mind is hate these people, hate that people, then I would submit to you that your mind is not really being transformed, right? Your focus is not so much my righteousness in following the word, right? If your focus is those the fake ones and they need to, and they go bow down, they go put this, I submit to you that what you might be calling Torah study might not actually be that. I told the story yesterday. I think it was, our second day, I think. Regina, I won't tell the whole story again, but I talked about Frederick Douglass's in his autobiography, how there's this one really, really mean slave master, and he wasn't a Christian yet, right? He was traveling evangelical. One of those tent meetings came through, and then the master got saved, and it said all the slaves wanted to wait and see what kind of man he became. And Frederick Douglass said he became even nastier and meaner. He said, oh, okay, that kind. And the slaves recognized that everybody talking about heaven wasn't going there, right? So they recognized, okay, he went down to the altar, and the preacher prayed for him, all that kind of stuff. So he wants to, okay, what's master gonna do? Master was beating folks like they was like, so he said, oh, okay. So his saved was meaner. Right. So that's what I'm saying. So what Frederick Douglass was saying, who he himself got saved at a young age, and God prophesied over him that he would become free and become this great spokesman, which he was a slave at the time, right? So God's word came true. Frederick Douglass himself talked about his own walk with God. He talked about how God convicted him about his need for a savior, and he claimed Jesus as his savior. He talks about his Christian experience at great length, right? So for him, as an older man, he looked back and he said, oh, okay, so some of the white masters kept talking about Jesus and the Bible and stuff. He said they were just using that because some of them were cool, right? Some of them weren't as mean, but some of them were as mean as snakes. And he said sometimes it had a lot to do, they thought they was all spiritual, and they were some of the most racist, right? Exactly. So my point being, to talk about it is one thing, right? But if there is a desire for, okay, I'm studying the word, there's this spiritual journey that I'm on, it should make me, in essence, a more humble, open. I mean, there should be less of Dumisani and more of what God is trying to do. That should be my journey. If Dumisani is still as brazen and arrogant and proud as he was at 18, 19, 20, then something's wrong, and it's not the Bible. Something's wrong, and it's not God. Something's broken, but it's not the word, right? There's something that Dumisani needs to be looking at. So I've said that with some of my younger ones. Oh, they're fake. I hear all that, bro. But I'm saying about you, right? So what is your journey, right? Other than we're gonna kill all these white people, right? I hear all that fire and brimstone stuff, but I mean, are you growing? And what about my family? Am I a better husband? Am I a better father? Those types of things, right? I found that when the focus kind of gets centered back there, then it's more of a, okay, am I growing, right? Not, who needs to bow down to me. That's I just wanted to interject that part.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. So we're definitely coming up on our 2 hours already. I can't believe it. So what I would like us to do, we have gotten through chapter 3 and kind of some of 4, but we as this conversation are going to take a break for about 2 weeks. So in a minute, I'm going to have Pastor Dumasani talk to us about he's going to Jerusalem, who he's taking there, what they're going to be doing. But so I want to do these few commercial announcements, if I can, before then. So he's going to Jerusalem, but I want you to know that we also have a trip going to Jerusalem as well. So I want you to know that we do have the Leadership Summit, which is the Egypt-Israel tour from June 26th to July 3rd, 2023. And that is being co-hosted by Major Daughter and Dr. Malapo. And you can find out more by going to the leadershipsummit.mdntvlive.com, or you can message me or message Major Daughter. We're having a great summit in Israel. And it's best to just go to the website to get all of the information. But it is something that you don't want to miss, because on the tour, we are going to have ambassadors and leaders from other African nations with us, which means, when you're eating breakfast in the hotel and dinner, you'll be sitting with them and talking with them and walking through the Holy Land, touring with them, have this opportunity to conduct business, to build relationships, right? So if you have a heart to get to know Africa, because Egypt is in Africa, and then we're going to travel over into Israel, and we will have some people from Israeli Parliament that'll be speaking at the summit. You definitely want to come. So please contact myself or Major Daughter to get more information about attending the summit. The next thing I want you to know is that on Sunday, this coming Sunday, we are going to have a conversation Sunday evening about nations, because the group that I work with, Every Black Life Matters, we are going on the tour, but before we go on the tour, we are stopping in Nigeria. So we're going to be in Nigeria for about 5 days, and we'll be talking on to faith leaders and political leaders and youth. We'll be talking about business structure, but we'll be talking about wokeism, because United Nations is trying to push that LGBTQ agenda on the African countries, threatening to withhold their aid, our former President Obama has been over there trying to tell these nations that they need to bring in and accept abortion and accept the LGBT agenda. So we'll be talking to them about languaging and why that's wrong, where the roots of wokeism come from, and also in some mild respect, not really in deep, just even talking about end times, Magog and Gog, China, Russia. China's coming in, they're buying up land, but then they're also pushing a communist agenda to their young people. So in that, we are Christians and we're going over there. And so our group, we will have 24/7 security. It'll be required for us because they do kill Christians and they do kidnap Black Americans. And so I'll be talking about going to Nigeria, but I'll be staying in South Africa, going to Tanzania and some other nations. And so this is what 1040 Window does. And we created this platform on Clubhouse so that there are others who want to give back, you want to contribute, you have a skill, Maybe you're good at writing. Maybe you want to teach English. Maybe you want to teach them, business planning or budgeting or financing. This 1040 window was created to help connect people of faith who want to work and help people in the 1040 window. And maybe you're not able to travel, but technology allows us to work and partner and to build those collaboratives. So we'll be having a room on Sunday night talking about that and inviting you and sharing what opportunities you can to participate, to do mission work, but in like the 21st century, the way that we do it now. So those two things are my commercial plugs for now. So I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Dumasani to tell us about his peace initiative and when they're going to Israel.
Yes, ma'am. Our main outreach of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, our premier outreach, I should say, is called the Peace Initiative. It's an acronym for Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, in which we recruit young Black American men and women across the country and pretty soon in Africa as well. And we go through what's a 9-month journey. We come together each month and we open up all kinds of different topics: biblical, geopolitical. We talk about the United Nations, ancient Israel, modern Israel, Israel, Africa, all these different things, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Palestinian human rights. We discuss all of these things together each month. And then we, in the course of that 9 months, take 2 trips. We started in September. The 9-month journey ends in June, and they'll be doing all kinds of work in their communities across the country. But in December was the motherland. We went to South Africa for 10 days, had an amazing, amazing time. And then June is the Holy Land in a few days. Actually, some of our staff is already on their way to Israel, be touching down sometime probably there tomorrow morning. Joshua, who is the executive director, that's my son, and Olga, who's my daughter-in-law, she's one of the board members. They'll be in Israel very soon, hanging out in Jerusalem until we get there. We will be there. Well, we'll leave here Sunday in the East Coast, but we'll get there Monday, Israel's time. We'll be there for 10 days as well, traveling around the country, different speakers, different ones, Knesset members and IDF leaders. We're going up to the Golan and everything. Shout out to Amir Avivi, the retired IDF Brigadier General. Some of his staff is taking us up to the Golan and everything. And so we're going to be seeing the land of Israel, the people. We'll be speaking to Arab Christians, Arab Muslim, Israeli Jews, and we'll be speaking throughout the Ethiopian community. We're hoping to get a chance to go to the Ethiopian Christian church and talk to the Kassim, the Jewish priests, and just a lot, just to understand the land and understand the people even more. And again, when they return to their cities across the country, will be part of the hub of Black Jewish Synergy in their cities. And it is the inaugural one. So if you want to know, this is our pilot program, right? We will be launching the 2nd year of the IPSI ambassadors, as well as the 1st year of the IPSI pastors later on around Juneteenth, coming up here pretty soon. So if you want to know more, go to ibsi.org. You can check that out and everything. And yes, we're a nonprofit. So if you're saying, hey, I'd like our organization to help support, we would love for you to do it. You can click on there. You can find out about donating as well.
All right. Thank you for that.
I'll do that too fast again.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I don't see any questions in the chat. I know we went kind of intellectual today, and thank you for those who could hang in there for that. We are going to schedule some more conversations because, like I said, we kind of only got halfway through the book. So I will work with him and we'll schedule something to start up, because when he gets back from Israel, then in 2 days I leave for Nigeria. And not that I can't do the work while I'm in Nigeria. I can. We just have to. We'll just have to schedule the timing to get that to work. I don't want us to wait like a month, but we will continue these conversations. And I'm really excited because I've been able to meet some other people who have organizations that are building bridges between the Jewish and the Christian community. Other organizations that are Jewish foundations, there are Jewish people who are doing work with other African Jews and the diaspora. I met some of those as well. So what we're going to do with the 1040 window is, after I have these conversations with Pastor Dumasani, is that maybe twice a month we'll come back and we'll introduce you to other organizations who are doing work in building bridges. And of course, we're going to have Pastor Dumasani on again and again, because we just enjoy having the conversation as much as his schedule will allow, right? But we do have other organizations that we're going to talk with. And as well, as soon as they decide to open up their rooms, we'll be letting you know when those rooms are, so that you can go over and participate and learn, because that's the most important thing. So I don't see any other questions at all anywhere. Yeah, so I think we're done. Lonnie, did you have anything you want to say before we close out? Okay, Lonnie may have stepped away. And Major Daughter, she's been chatting in the text, so that's good. All right, then. Pastor Dumasani, will you close us out in prayer, please?
Sure, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. God, we thank you for your goodness again and for your faithfulness, and we thank you for our opportunity here again to share together as we discuss Zionism in the Black Church, Israel, your people, and these different issues of justice, issues of your word. Thank you for Regina Roundtree. I thank you that as she and every Black Life Matters does prepare to travel overseas, throughout Africa, Israel as well, that you would continue to give them your hand of mercy and traveling grace there, and cause their trips to be successful and fruitful. God, we bless your name for it. We pray also, thank you for the ambassadors, those young men and women who will be headed to Israel very soon, trusting you that in our time in the Holy Land, you would just bless them, God, as we learn, as we understand, and you give us clarity and wisdom as we do the work of strengthening these ties with Africa and Israel and the Black and Jewish communities. God, we pray that you be with us best of this week, and that you would bless the homes and the families of your people. We thank you for your word, and that promises us that it is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. So we give you thanks and praise for your goodness to us in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen.
Amen. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your participation in the chats, for the private messages that you sent. And just stay tuned. As long as you're a member with 1040 window, the house, you'll get all of the notifications, and I'll be keeping you updated in the chat on the different rooms that we'll be having. But the next room, it's already posted. It will be this coming Sunday, talking about nations, and they're looking for leaders. Their leaders are looking for support and resources. And we're talking about your skills and your talents that will be able to assist them. So thank you, Pastor Dumasani. Enjoy your trip to Jerusalem. We will be following you, stalking you on Facebook and Instagram, looking for photos. So don't forget to keep us updated.
Yes, ma'am. I sure will. Thank you, Regina. Thanks for everything. Talk to you very soon, ma'am.
Yes. All right. This room will end in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.